So it comes down to who Trump is going to listen to, and he keeps going back and forth. That's been the pattern since he took office, is he keeps changing his mind.
Right.
Last week it seemed like this was it. This was his peace plan for Ukraine. They have to accept it, and it's or else. But now it's amazing, which a little bit of outrage from neocons in Washington can do. Now it looks like it's Russia that's going to have to be saying, no, we can't accept this, and therefore the war continues.
Aaron Maté just revealed why the Ukrainian peace deal with Russia is doomed to failure. And in this clip, he tells Judge Napolitano how it comes down to neocon sabotage. What exactly have they done to sabotage the deal, and why are the Russians sure to reject it? So let's watch. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Why did the US and the UK stage that coup in 2014, which precipitated what's happening there now?
Well, they backed the coup because the government of Yanukovych was perceived as being friendly with Russia. And, his cardinal sin in U.S. eyes was to push through a measure in Ukraine's constitution that ruled out membership in NATO and said that Ukraine will be permanently neutral. Now, Yanukovych happened to have the support of the majority of Ukrainians, if you look at the polls. And he also happened to be in line with Ukraine's founding declaration of state sovereignty, which said that Ukraine will be a permanently neutral state. But that contradicted the U.S. plan, which back in 1994 was authorized formally by Clinton's National Security Council as the, quote, neo-containment of Russia. So bringing Ukraine into NATO was seen to be a key plank in the goal of the neo-containment of Russia. And that's why in 2008, the Bush administration pushed through this promise to Ukraine and Georgia that both these countries will one day join NATO. And once that was formalized with this NATO invitation, that set the path for conflict. And so when you have a President Yanukovych trying to enshrine permanent neutrality, he had to go. And there also was the belief that if you take, Yanukovych out, that regime change might redound to Moscow as well. And maybe regime change in Ukraine will be so destabilizing for Russia that Vladimir Putin will be overthrown too. So that's basically been the goal, and that's been the policy that has been pursued ever since.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If there's one thing that the Washington war machine hates the most, it's neutrality. And that's what Yanukovych wanted. He just wanted neutrality. They tried to paint this and propagandize this in the corporate media in America by saying he wanted to be with Russia. He wanted to collaborate with Russia. That would have been a sovereign choice if they wanted to do that, but they didn't. They wanted to actually be a neutral buffer zone to avert the prospect of war, which they knew was on the horizon, which the U.S. knew was on the horizon. The U.S. knew that very plainly because of the Niet Means Niet memo authored by William Burns. He eventually became the CIA director under Biden, but he was the Ukrainian ambassador. He sent a letter back to his boss, Condoleezza Rice, saying, hey, I've talked to all the political factions in Russia, and NATO inclusion of Ukraine is the reddest of red lines that will guarantee a future conflict with Russia. He wrote this as plainly as possible, and that's been divulged, the contents of that memo, due to the heroic efforts of Julian Assange. So that's exactly right. They want bellicosity toward Russia. They wanted a proxy war. They wanted to expand NATO all the way up to Russia's borders. Bush said it straight up in the Budapest summit, as Aaron just mentioned. This was the plan all along, and the U.S. was using Ukraine as a chess piece on a grand chessboard of empire building in Eastern Europe. That's just what happened.
To the point now where Trump, this week unveils this new idea for a peace plan. And you can see in Washington the absolute freak out from both parties. Mitch McConnell saying this is a huge betrayal, because this is a betrayal to the project of trying to use Ukraine to bleed Russia, because it would finally bring this horrible war to an end.
How do you think the 28-point plan came about? I mean, was it literally drafted of 2 days of meetings in Miami between Kirill Dmitriev and Steve Witkoff, neither of whom is an official of either government?
Well, that is my understanding, that Dmitriev and Witkoff, and unfortunately Jared Kushner, because speaking of someone like without a title, Jared Kushner really has no title at all. I mean, Witkoff is an envoy, and so is Dmitriev. He's an advisor in some capacity to.
They called Jared Kushner the investor. Actually, J.D. Vance called him the investor. just giving up the game completely. He wants to develop real estate in Gaza, and that's part of, the Trump commission that's being set up as part of the ceasefire to have his buddies, his son-in-law, economically profit from this venture of ceasefire. There's not going to be a permanent peace there anyways. We might not even have to worry about that. But he's given away the game by including Jared Kushner in all these negotiations when he serves to gain beneficially economically, not because he's serving people and consumers and giving them something they want, just because he's politically connected and associated familially with the president.
Putin, especially on the issue of foreign investment. So I do think that he has an actual mandate along with Witkoff. Why Kushner is there is
well, is he now an international diplomat, or is he trying to buy Ukraine land cheap so he can develop it?
That's a great question. I mean, you've talked about this, how JD Vance just referred to Kushner as the investor in Gaza.
Right. In public, the vice president said that.
Yeah. But I do think that Dmitriev was acting on understanding that Putin at least was listening. And I think Putin was initially receptive to the plan. Like when it was released, he said, this is a basis for discussion. He didn't accept it wholeheartedly, but he said this is a basis for discussion. But what's happened ever since then, just in the last few days? The European Union freaked out. Neocons in Washington from both parties freaked out. They put pressure on Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio immediately caved to them. And the story came out that Rubio had told a group of senators, "Oh, this wasn't our plan. This was a Russian plan," which means either one of two things. It means Rubio actually said that, or it means that the senators misheard Rubio, and Rubio had to backtrack and say, "No, this was our plan too." But
seems like he was trying to intentionally sabotage that plan. He's the consummate neocon, always urging for more aid to Ukraine, always urging to escalate this war. It seems like most plausibly he would have said that to try to sabotage the deal. And the reporting on this has been so absurd that this is just a Russian plan, the Russian plan. Even though the Russians are kind of in the driver's seat, guys, if you expect there to be a peace, they have to weigh into it more heavily than the Ukrainians. Because guess what happens otherwise? They keep fighting on. They might take Odessa. They might take Kyiv. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think they've even set their sights on Kyiv itself and Ukraine proper, but they could have a new offensive. And for this to just be perverted and tarnished in a way that makes it completely unfeasible and unpalatable to the Russians, I think, again, gives away the game. It shows they're not serious about this because you've had all these amendments with Zelensky weighing in and some versions, according to New York Times reporting, taking out the clause that prohibits Ukraine from joining NATO. There's no way that's acceptable to the Russians. It's dead on arrival then. I already thought it was dead on arrival because they were going to limit the Ukrainian military, the standing military, to 600,000 men. When Zelensky was almost ready to accept a Ukrainian military of 85,000 men as part of the Istanbul arrangement that he had initially agreed to back in the early months of the war in 2022, but then that was sabotaged by Boris Johnson and the U.S. State Department. There's too many things now in this amended plan that I think that this plan was just an excuse for Trump to sell to his base. Hey, I'm trying to end the war, but then no, we're going to let neocons like Marco Rubio tarnish it. And, right-wing nationalists in Ukraine get Zelensky to alter it and create amendments that are unsuitable to the Russians. That's what I think is happening here.
But the point is, somebody, whether it's Rubio, the Republican senators, or both, didn't like the idea of making peace with Russia. And so since then, you've had now new talks between the U.S. and Ukraine. And the reports coming out are that Trump's peace plan, which already was not going to be accepted by Russia because I don't think Russia saw it as going far enough to meet their demands, that even that's been watered down even more in favor of Ukraine's demands. Yeah. So making it even more of a non-starter. So apparently what was before clear language about Ukraine not joining NATO, apparently that's been taken out for now. And also the language about Ukraine withdrawing from all the Donbass, because parts of it still controls, that's also been watered down, which basically guarantees that Russia is not going to accept this. So you have basically, this comes down to which faction does Trump want to listen to? Which identity does he want for MAGA? Is it the sort of faction of his administration with people like JD Vance, who don't want to keep fueling this proxy war in Ukraine, who recognize that no matter how you feel about who started it, what was the U.S. role, the Maidan coup, the Minsk Accords, the sabotage Istanbul talks, NATO expansion. I mean, we have our clear perspective on that. But even if you don't agree with our perspective about, how just horrible this whole thing has been and just how immoral it's been, just practically how the strategy of fueling this war with weapons and trying to collapse Russia's economy by sanctions hasn't worked. So it's time to throw in the towel. So is Trump going to listen to that faction or the permanent foreign policy establishment in Washington, represented by people like Marco Rubio and his former Senate colleagues, who just don't want to have any kind of peace deal with Russia?
Yeah, I mean, under a most cynical view, Trump is actually trying to himself be complicit in the sabotage of this peace deal, and again, make it seem like, oh, he's actually trying to do something to solve this conflict, to get the U.S. out of it. By the way, you wouldn't have to do any peace plan to do that. You could just withdraw U.S. forces and resources and aid permanently. That would be the real America First solution. That'd be the America only solution that Americans actually prefer at this point, after 3.5 years of bloodshed and $200 billion down the drain to support this corrupt regime, which is ban political opposition, ban political media that was adversarial to it, shut down Eastern Orthodox churches, expanded conscription mandates, ushered in martial law, closed down businesses to accommodate. It's just so absurd. Enough is enough. But then under the most charitable view of Trump, you'd have to say that his advisors are just outmaneuvering him. His neocon warmonger advisors are outmaneuvering him every single time. He never sees through it. And that's about as charitable as it can get, because I think that is just, not accurate. I think that he's seen these maneuvers too many times not to understand the game and what's going on here, because Pompeo and Bolton did it in his first term too. So I think Trump is complicit, and it's time to stop just saying it's just the evil advisors. Not saying Aaron's saying that, he isn't, but a lot of Trump's support base is.
Because they see that as a sign of weakness, and they don't want to at all give Putin a win. So it comes down to who Trump is going to listen to, and he keeps going back and forth. That's been the pattern since he took office, is he keeps changing his mind.
Right.
Last week it seemed like this was it. This was his peace plan for Ukraine. They have to accept it, and it's or else. But now it's amazing, which is a little bit of outrage from neocons in Washington can do. Now it looks like it's Russia that's going to have to be saying, no, we can't accept this, and therefore the war continues.
Absolutely right. If you guys remember, it was one of the only great statements by Trump on this in his whole presidency, as far as I'm concerned, when a reporter asked him, what does Zelensky think of this peace deal that's been concocted? And Trump says he'll have to like it. He'll absolutely have to like it. Well, that turned out not to be true. You're letting it be amended into a position where it can't be acceptable, that it is a dead letter at that point.
Here's a clip from our archives going back to 2013.
People of Ukraine.
Oh, great.
This
Great.
is your moment.
Народи український, це ваш момент.
This is about you, no one else.
Це про вас.
This is about the future you want for your country. This is about the future you deserve.
Це про ваше майбутнє, про майбутнє вашої країни. Це про майбутнє, на яке ви заслуговуєте.
A future in Europe.
Майбутнє Європи.
A future of peace. And good
Майбутнє
relations
миру.
with all of your neighbors.
Майбутнє всіх ваших сусідів.
The free world is with you. America is with you. I am with you.
Що творилося, коли...
And the destiny you seek lies in Europe.
І ваша доля, як ми вважаємо, знаходиться в об'єднаній Європі.
Ukraine will make Europe better, and Europe will make Ukraine better.
Thank you. Thank you.
To be clear, this is McCain rousing and stoking the fire that became the Maidan Revolution. And a lot of people say, no, this was totally organic. The U.S. had nothing to do with it. Well, it's not just this and the public show of support for overthrowing the Yanukovych government, which was democratically elected. So this was the U.S. not being in Ukraine to protect democracy, but to completely subvert democracy just in the favor of an adversarial regime toward Russia, the one they wanted under Poroshenko eventually after the provisional government, and then Zelensky after Poroshenko. And it's not just this, it's Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt talking about who had to be part of that provisional bellicose government toward Russia. That's been leaked. The game's been given away. McCain was a total warmonger. Lindsey Graham, too, went over there. Just months away from this, the government was overthrown. And then the Poroshenko government and the provisional government immediately attacked the Donbass, and the civil war played out. That civil war lasted for 8 years before Putin invaded. You know, just context there that you never hear in Western media for the most part.
One of the great warmongers of the modern era.
Yeah, and so John McCain's Senate colleagues are continuing his legacy by freaking out about this prospect of peace. And listen, who is John McCain to tell the people of Ukraine what their destiny is? He says your destiny is in Europe. Okay, sure, there are many Ukrainians who agree with that, but there are also many Ukrainians who don't. And the problem with U.S. policy is it only listens to those Ukrainians who agree with John McCain. And you can wish as much as
that says it all. U.S. foreign policy only pays attention to those Ukrainians, and it's not just Ukrainians, who agree with John McCain every time, because guess what John McCain's answer always was? Bomb them, turn Iran into a parking lot, overthrow Iraq, depose Gaddafi, engage in a civil war in Syria on the part of Al-Qaeda. And that's what you got. Al-Qaeda now rules that country. Jilani, or al-Shara now, was Al-Qaeda. That's what you get under a John McCain foreign policy. And this government hasn't learned the lessons of moving beyond John McCain catastrophes.
You want that every Ukrainian agrees with John McCain, but the fact is they don't. It's a very divided country. And that's why it was so crazy to try to impose our conditions on Ukraine, which is a very divided country. And that's why neutrality always made sense. And that's why most Ukrainians actually supported neutrality. And even at that time, if you look at polls from that period, Ukrainians were basically equally divided on the Maidan movement that John McCain was there acting as a sort of de facto leader of. And, on that stage, we should mention were people like Oleg Tanyabuk, who was the co-founder of the Svoboda Party. A year prior, so December 2012.
Isn't that the neo-Nazi party?
Yeah, they were founded, inspired by German Nazis. That's why their symbol, their iconography reflected Nazi emblems. And a year before that, so that became clips from December 2013. A year before that, December 2012, the European Parliament put out a statement saying nobody should associate with Svoboda because of their racist, xenophobic, anti-Semitic views. And that message was directed at parties in Ukraine because the European Parliament didn't want to work with parties that were working with Svoboda. And a year later, John McCain comes in, and now all of a sudden, Svoboda gets U.S. blessing because Svoboda was at the forefront of turning that Maidan movement, those protests, which were initially against corruption and calling for closer ties with the West, into a full-blown campaign for regime change. So that's who we've empowered, and that's why Zelensky today remains in a tough position, because the elements that drove the Maidan coup, the far-right elements empowered by people like John McCain, they threatened his life.
Exactly right. I think this is something that goes unnoticed by most Western media. I think Zelensky fears this far-right radical faction in his own country far more than Putin, far more than the Russians, that if he yields to any of these peace deals and peace provisions that might actually lead to a road to peace, his own life is threatened. And that could encourage exile. That's what I hope, that there is exile. He's generally a pawn for the U.S., and Ukrainian civilians are the biggest pawns for the U.S., right? They've suffered the most due to this absurd war. Over 1 million casualties on the Ukrainian side by most estimates on this. Not nearly that amount of casualties on the Russian side. But I'm so glad Aaron's bringing that up because so many people don't hear about the threats posed by right-wing groups towards Zelensky if he concedes on anything that would lead to peace.
If he makes a peace deal with Russia. And that's ultimately who's still running the show in Ukraine and Washington as well.
Is his life still threatened if he makes a peace deal with Russia?
I think it is. When you have years upon years of threats from paramilitary forces that are embedded in the army. The Azov Battalion, for example, is essentially the most potent fighting force in Ukraine today. When you have those threats, continue through this year. I mean, even earlier this year, a major far right leader threatened Zelensky's life. So yeah, I do think his life still is at risk if he makes peace with Russia.
Yeah, I agree with Aaron. Again, this isn't reported much in Western media because they just want us to forget about the fact that there's a huge neo-Nazi movement in Ukraine, and they have pull not only in the government, but also in the military, the Azov Regiment. Aaron also mentioned the Svoboda Party. That's a party inspired by this guy, Steven Bandera, a far-right Nazi in Ukraine that fought, during World War II and just prior to World War II. But this guy was so notorious that even the Nazis thought this guy was too extreme, essentially. That is the inheritance that the far-right groups have in Ukraine. And we're just supposed to pretend they don't exist. Remember, there actually was mainstream reporting on this problem, the Nazi problem in Ukraine, in several major Western news articles, including, I think, even the New York Times in the years following the Maidan coup. But then we're just supposed to forget that that's even remotely accurate after Putin invaded Ukraine, because we need to support this war. We need to send them billions of dollars. We need to push back Russia. We need regime change in Russia. Biden even flirted with that language a few times, which is just totally absurd. But that's what we get from this. And I'm with Aaron. I think this deal is dead on arrival. They've tarnished it too much into a position of making it so, indescribably unfeasible for the Russians to ever accept, especially when they're in the driver's seat for negotiations, when they occupy 20% of Ukraine or something like 90% of the Donbass, when they've accomplished almost all of their war aims. And we're just going to allow the Ukrainians to weigh into this peace deal and amend it into a state in which it makes it totally absurd and just unacceptable. No way it'll ever be accepted. But that's what you get. That's what you get from the Washington machine that, completely betrays its best promises all the time. With Trump promising to end the war in 24 hours. No, not whatsoever. With just days ago saying Zelensky will have to like the peace deal. No, the neocons and Zelensky were able to amend it into an unacceptable situation, and there's no way that this is accepted by the Russians. I'll eat crow if I'm wrong, but I'm guaranteeing you on this show, this is not going to be accepted by the Russians if the provision especially is taken out that prohibits Ukraine from joining NATO. That's not going to be accepted, no matter what else exists. But what do you guys think? Let me know down below. Is Aaron Maté right? Is this going to be acceptable? Is this war going to continue for maybe a year or more? Let me know in the comments down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to Judge Napolitano. Awesome interview. If you like this video and my take, please consider joining as a YouTube member. You can do that by clicking the join button down below. And if you do that, you can gain access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. You'll be able to see those members only videos immediately if you do that, and I really appreciate that. Also, if you want a free copy of my first book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below, plug in your email on that site it sends you to. I'll send it to you in PDF form, absolutely free, no obligation, just because I like you. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.